Hey guys, I hope you guys don't mind. I'm gonna keep. I want to do I want to learn about how to be a doctor, kind of like in the background. Just to, it'd be kind of cool to just be a doctor. Maybe in like 20, 30 years, I can be a doctor. But so right now, I'm just osmosising information. It's okay to learn by osmosis if it's not your primary field, but you want to learn kind of casually. Hope no one minds. So we're gonna just be kind of like listening to some stuff. When when my bros are down, I'll put music on. But doing this, so dear God, help us all appreciate knowledge in the various forms. Maybe want to be polymath, learn several different disciplines, and I think doctoring is good because you know about Jesus, and every little bit you know is better. It's like doing first aid. It's like second aid. You know, you might not be doing like a full God thing, but you can be doing a little bit more than we normally would. I know enough about research. Like I got really stoked into this stuff because I was researching just testosterone boosters. Oh my God, they made me feel so good. It was ridiculous. I still feel remnants of how good that made me feel. Right. So you can really pork your body to like superpower your body, and I want to make sure people like are healthy and stuff. I want people to do exercise, figure out like things to tell people that encourage them in their exercise and how to eat exercise. So I just need to learn. I want to learn about like this stuff kind of casually.
The macroscopic.
We're learning about macro right now. You want to learn about League of Legends macro? First, you have to know like medical macro, right?
Body is called gross anatomy.
It's gross.
Gross means
pretty freaking
big.
Gross.
Right, so if you learn the different parts of like your human body, the whole macroscopic, meaning what you can see with your own eyes, that's called gross anatomy. I guess some people think it's called gross anatomy because it's gross, disgusting, but it's called gross because it's big. Now, in this class, not only are we going to learn gross anatomy, what the different parts are called and what they look like, we're going to also tell you a little bit about surface anatomy. I want to give you two examples of surface anatomy right now. We're going to learn much more about these examples later. One example of surface anatomy I want to mention is something called the sternal angle. The sternal angle, or angle of Lewis. So it's called the sternal angle, or angle of Lewis. You'd say, what's the sternal angle? So, if you were to take your finger and rub this bone right here. Now, in English, we would call this bone the breastbone. I don't care what it's called in English. I'm not going to test you on English names. And the scientific or anatomic name is the sternum. This is the sternum. When you rub your hand, your finger, over the sternum, you'll feel a bump. Go ahead, try it. Rub your finger right over your sternum, and as you rub it up and down, you'll feel a ridge, a bump. That bump is called the sternal angle, or sternal angle of Lewis. Now, why do we care? Feel that bump, that ridge. Go ahead, do it. If you can't find it on yourself, how are you going to do it on a patient? All right, when you feel that bump, just to the sides of that bump are ribs. That's the second pair of ribs. The second pair of ribs are attached right where that bump is. This is the first pair, here's the second pair. You'd say, why do we care? Who cares? Second pair of ribs, so what? That's the top of the heart. So the top of the heart, how we locate the top of the heart is, right, we feel that little bump or ridge called the sternal angle. That's the level of the second pair of ribs. That's where the top of the heart is, right? We don't just say, as a future nurse, or a physician's assistant or something, we don't just say, oh, your heart, oh, it's somewhere in there. We need to be a little bit more precise than simply say it's somewhere in here. All right? So that's how we locate it. Now, a second example of surface anatomy I want to give you is the spinous process. The spinous process of the seventh cervical vertebra. All right, the spinous process of the seventh cervical vertebra. Now, you say, what the hell does that mean? So on the back of our vertebral column, we have these spines. You can feel them, right? You feel those spines or spinous processes on your back. Now, what does cervical mean? Anybody know what cervical is? Neck. Cervical means neck. So we want to specifically locate the spine or spinous process of the 7th cervical vertebra, the 7th vertebra of the neck. That's very easy to locate because you can palpate it. Does anybody know what the word palpate means? Palpate means you can touch or feel it. So to touch or feel. So you'd say, what do you mean palpate, to touch or feel? If you feel the back of your neck, on the back of your neck, you'll feel a spine, a prominent spine, a bump on the back side of your neck. That bump, that spine, is the spinous process of the 7th cervical vertebra. So it's used as an anatomic landmark. These are called anatomic landmarks. Now, you'd say, wonderful. Now that I palpate or can feel this bump or spine of the 7th cervical vertebra, so what? Could you feel a spine right below it? All right, well, there's a spine below it. Can you feel a spine below that? You'd say, yeah, it's a little bit harder to feel. Well, if you count 2 spines below the 7th cervical, that's the top of the heart on the backside. The top of your heart, when you're trying to locate it on the backside of the body, is 2 bumps, 2 spinous processes below what's called C7. C7 is the 7th cervical vertebra. It's called C7. So you count 2 bumps or spinous processes below that prominent
You get one
bump,
game in,
and that's where the top of the heart
I got 2
is,
MMOs
on
coming
the
out than an
backside.
RTS.
These are known as anatomic landmarks. Anatomic landmarks. There's a lot of this in medicine, so that we feel or palpate different parts of the body so we know where the different organs are located. And in fact, the vertebral column is really, in many ways, used like a yardstick for locating not only where your heart is, but where your kidneys are and where other organs of the body are located. We're going to be learning more about
The Clash of
this.
Clans.
So, this is just an introduction for right now. These are examples of what we call surface anatomy. If you're going in, you want to become a nurse, you want to become a physician's assistant, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a radiology technologist, you're going to be learning how to feel or palpate the different parts of the body so you know where they are. So that's part of what's known as a physical examination of the patient. All right, regional anatomy. What's that? Regional anatomy is when we study the anatomy of the body by area, by region. For example, who in the class is interested in going into dental hygiene or dentistry?
I was thinking maybe
dental hygiene. I know anybody interested in dentistry or dental hygiene. So
I should have probably got
so when you enter the dental hygiene
Barrier
program,
versus Harding Age. I'm thinking maybe Barrier versus
in the very first semester, you're going to have head and neck anatomy. This is the area you're going to have an entire semester-long course just on this. Because if you're working in the mouth, you sure as hell better know the head and neck. Because that's where you're going to spend all your time every day looking at that patient's head and neck. That's called regional anatomy. You could, not only is there head and neck, if somebody wanted to go into podiatry, what's podiatry?
Study foot.
All right, so a podiatrist
I just went to a
is
podiatrist
somebody
the other
who's
day.
licensed to do medical procedures on the leg and foot. So they don't study all of human anatomy. They focus on leg and foot anatomy. That's the region that they study. You can have head and neck regional anatomy, leg and foot. You could have chest or thoracic anatomy. A hand surgeon is going to be focusing on hand anatomy. People going into physical therapy or occupational therapy. Does everybody know what one of the major distinctions is between a PT and an OT? Anybody? Yeah.
So,
What are the, yeah. Any others? Yes. main distinctions between a PT and OT. OTs primarily work with the hands, the arms and hands, the upper extremities. PTs primarily focus on the legs. Now that's not the only distinction. Some of you mentioned others, but most physical therapists are helping people walk. Most occupational therapists are helping people use their hands. So that has to do with which region or part of the body they focus on. Now both OTs and PTs will learn both arms and legs, but they focus more on either the upper part of the body or the lower part of the body. All right, so that's a regional
Let's
anatomy.
click the harder there.
If somebody wanted to go into obstetrical nursing, you'd say, what do you mean obstetrical nursing? If somebody's going to be a midwife or basically work in the maternity ward, then they sure better know the pelvic anatomy very well, shouldn't they? Because all day long, they're going to be delivering babies out through the bottom of the pelvis. So they really have to know pelvic anatomy well. Okay, radiological anatomy. Radiological anatomy is where we use different techniques to see the inside of the body. So radiological anatomy basically involves using various types of scans. Scans of the body, images of the body. So let me mention a few types of scans, of ways of scanning the body. So one example, first, one of the simplest would be X-rays. X-rays, right? You can get an X-ray scan. Now, X-rays, and we'll have more to say about this later at another time, X-rays primarily allow us to see bones and teeth. So you take X-rays to see if you broke an arm bone, right? Is the bone fractured or broken? We, in people in dentistry or dental hygiene, use X-rays to see if there's holes or cavities in a tooth. So the X-rays primarily allow us to see hard structures like bones and teeth. Now, we can actually use X-rays to see soft tissues rather than bones and teeth if we use dyes. So an example of using a dye
I did that
along
one
with
time.
an X-ray would be something called an angiogram.
I got one of those the other, like,
We're gonna,
about 2 months ago.
I didn't do it today, but maybe next class meeting we're going to put out some X-rays and other types of things so you can get a sense of this. Has anybody ever heard of an angiogram? So an angiogram is when they inject a dye into the bloodstream so they can see a blood vessel. Without the dye, you can't use an X-ray to see a blood vessel. It won't show up on an X-ray. It only shows up bones and teeth. So yeah.
Is that the one?
Yeah, it's called a contrast medium. It's usually a type of iodine. There's all kinds of contrast mediums, or dyes, as it were, that can be introduced into different parts of the body. If anybody's ever heard of an upper or lower GI, it's where they introduce barium, which is a metal, into the digestive tract and take an X-ray image, and then you can see the outlines of the intestine. So without using the dye, you can't see it with an X-ray, but using the dye allows you to visualize it. Other things besides X-rays and angiograms, we mentioned earlier a CT scan or CAT scan. So what's a CAT scan? Well, this is where I'd like you to watch that video that's linked on my website. If you have the textbook, your textbook, and I didn't require you to get a textbook, but textbook, all these things I'm covering right now are in Chapter 1 of every anatomy textbook. And in Chapter 1, they would talk about the different ways of visualizing the inside of the body. We already said earlier today, CT or CAT stands for computerized tomography. This is where they use X-rays.
CAT
They
scan.
basically beam X-rays in a 360-degree plane through the body. And by creating these
CAT
images around the entire body, they use a computer to reconstruct what a section of through the body looks like. And again, watch the video that's linked on my website. It's a YouTube video, so you can understand this better. So it shows, has anybody ever had a CT scan done? So you remember, if you've had it done, they wheel you on like a gurney, and there's this thing spinning around. It's really like a camera, as it were, and it's taking these images.
I had
And
that just
they'll
a while
move
ago.
you through, it'll whirl around, and then they'll move you a little bit further, and it'll whirl around again. And each time it whirls around you 360 degrees, it creates an image, as if they had made a section right through your body. No, we're getting to the one that has the really loud sound. Yeah. Tomography. It's this word that we wrote here earlier. Tome as in to make a cut, like anatomy is to cut. That's a CAT scan. It does use X-rays, so it uses X-rays. So to the extent that X-rays can be harmful to us, obviously a simple X-ray, an angiogram which uses X-rays, or a CT scan uses X-rays. This is radiation. Now, there are other devices that allow us to see the inside of the body that do not use X-rays. An example of that is an MRI. Anybody know what an MRI stands for?
Magnetic resonance imaging.
Yeah, it stands for magnetic resonance imaging. Magnetic resonance imaging. Sometimes they'll just say MI, resonance imaging. And this is where they use a magnetic field. Now, creating these very high magnetic fields to visualize, to create images as if they'd made sections through your body, creates a very loud noise. Right, and they use it very commonly for images of the head. So it allows images of the brain, for example, to be probably the clearest, even better than a CT scan. So this is where they'll put you into basically a tube. You get very claustrophobic, and you hear this.
And when I say that, it encourages other people not to trash talk at future games. You know, I'm trying to detoxify the game. That's my goal. I'm not just trying to win games. I'm trying to detoxify, and that's one thing.
About 45 minutes. About 45 minutes, you're inside an MRI machine. So incidentally, they have technicians who do all these things. So as other types of health-related fields are to be a CT technician, an MRI technician, and so on to run these devices. Watch the video linked on my website that shows you an MRI. I want you to understand the difference between an MRI and a CT. But does an MRI use radiation? No, it uses a magnetic field. The big concern here with an MRI is that somebody doesn't have any metal in their body, because a magnetic field causes metal to move. So if somebody has any piece of metal, that magnetic field's going to cause that metal to start moving through their body. Also, if they have a battery-powered pacemaker, not only is it metallic, but that magnetic field's going to stop that battery-powered pacemaker from working. So you will see wherever there's an MRI machine, it has a warning to stay away from that area, that facility, if you have a battery-powered pacemaker. It's not only for brain. They use it for other. Yeah, it's commonly done though for brain spinal cord injuries. Well, you can walk by. They don't want you going into it, where the magnetic field would be measurable. So, and that's why they usually put the MRI machines in a separate building. Like at a hospital, it's usually in a separate building or in a basement, unlike the other devices. Now, another way of visualizing the inside of the body is with ultrasound. Ultrasound doesn't use X-rays, and it does not use a magnetic field. It uses, we'll call it sound, very high-frequency sound. And it bounces high-frequency sound waves off the part of the body. Ultrasound is considered the safest of these various techniques, and that's why they use ultrasound to see babies in the womb, because they don't want to look at babies with an X-ray or because X-rays are radiation that can cause genetic mutations, and they are also reluctant to use MRI, magnetic fields. So they use ultrasound. So that's called sonography. They also use ultrasound for other purposes. Earlier, there was a couple people who said they were interested in going into radiology tech. Is that right, or something? Is anybody interested in radiology tech or ultrasound? So you can get images of the inside of the heart and the arteries using an ultrasound. That's known as an echocardiogram. And again, watch the video linked on my website that shows you an echocardiogram using ultrasound. We want you to understand the difference between a CT, an MRI, and an echocardiogram done with ultrasound. These are different ways of visualizing the inside of the body. All of these ways of scanning or getting images on the inside of the body fall within this area called radiological anatomy, using these various devices. There are many others, but we'll just leave it at that. There's PET scans and other things as well. They use radioactive isotopes and so on. In terms of radioactive isotopes, if you know of anybody who has had diagnostic tests for cancer, they will commonly use radioactive isotopic tracers to see if the cancer cells have reached their lymph nodes and so on. So, yep. No, the electrocardiogram is not a scan of the body. It's not anatomic. That's functional. So electrocardiogram is something you'll learn about in physiology. That has to do with the electrical current flow through the heart. All of these are techniques or ways that in the medical sciences we use to investigate and evaluate the human body. And that's why this is called medical science. You have to learn your knowledge of science, chemistry, physics, biology, to understand how physicians and dentists and nurses and occupational therapists and everybody else study the human body. They use scientific methods to analyze it. They use, we've all had blood tests where they analyze chemicals in our bloodstream. And they will measure cholesterol levels in your blood. They'll measure glucose levels in your blood. They'll measure fatty acid levels. They'll measure red blood cell counts and white blood cell counts, all to evaluate and assess the condition of the body. This is what medical
it's easy to
science
say,
is
right?
about.
Died from acid,
All right,
obviously, but like I was
now,
trying to say, like a parody, like he died of
we
like.
can divide the human body into organ systems. So in chapter 1 of the textbook, or also I believe exercise 2, I think, or exercise 1 in the lab manual, and you don't need the textbook, so let's focus on the lab manual, which you do need to get. In exercise 1 of the lab manual, it summarizes the major systems of the body. I'll say them very quickly. You don't have to write it down, because you're going to look at exercise 1 in the lab manual. All right, and also I've got links on my website. So we're going to be learning in this class the skeletal system, the muscular system, the digestive system, the respiratory system, the urinary system, the circulatory system, the endocrine system, the lymphatic system, the reproductive system, and the nervous system, and the skin or integument. I think there are 9 systems. So we're going to be learning all these different systems of the body. And when we study the human body by systems, digestive system, circulatory system, reproductive system, that's called systemic anatomy, learning the body by systems. And that's the most common way that introductory anatomy classes analyze the body.
Praise God, man.
By systems.
Praise you. Doctors, man.
Now, the nervous system is, without question, the most complicated of the systems, and they give a special name for the nervous system. They call it neuroanatomy.
I would love to be able to understand how, like,
is so damn complicated that you can literally take an advanced course in just neuroanatomy, the anatomy of the nervous system. It's usually offered as an upper division or graduate course just on the nervous system because of its complexity.
Like, I want to, like, the eyes work just like a monitor cable, but they don't know, like, an encryption of what God used.
Or the reproductive system or circulatory system can be further subdivided into organs. So for example, this is all covered in exercise 1 of your lab manual. The digestive system would include, the esophagus, the stomach, the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum, the different parts of the colon. It would include the liver, the pancreas, and gallbladder. All of those are organs of the digestive system. A female reproductive
get so much
system
mastery points off
would
this.
consist of ovaries and fallopian tubes and the uterus and the mammary glands. These would all be part of the female reproductive system. So we're going to be learning which organs make up different systems of the body. And again, this is all in the exercise 1 of the lab manual. I have an old edition here. Doesn't really matter. In exercise 1,
there we go.
they have
That's what speed looking at.
pictures,
388. That's good
and-
speed. That's good speed. Anything over 360 is a passable speed.
The
380
lab
is
manual, again,
good
you
speed.
doesn't matter what edition, but when you look at it, I'll just show you what it looks like. We're going to be talking about this. This is exercise 1 of the lab manual, and this is. Here's where actually it's exercise 2. Exercise 2 says organ systems overview, and it goes through right here. There's a whole chart in exercise 2 of the names of the different organ systems and the organs that make them up. Right. So here it just to show you. Exercise 2. Here's we just talked about for example, the digestive system. And here it says, digestive system is the oral cavity, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, the teeth, the salivary glands, the liver, and the pancreas.
So you'd say, what, do we have to know that?
Yes, you will need to know that. That's the second exercise. In the
He must
lab
teach
manual.
this school that's not
So
very
this is why
doesn't
we
respect education.
recommend a college
Where's this
level
guy from,
biology
man?
class before you take this.
Professor Fink?
So you've at least got some introduction to these parts of the body rather than no knowledge of the body. Because we need to know the organs that make up the different systems.
Aussie State.
Now, organs such as the stomach, such as the heart,
Aussie
such as
State.
the ovaries, are in turn made up of tissues. Now, the study of tissues is called histology. It comes from the Greek root histo, meaning tissue. Histo means tissue, so the study of the different tissues. We're going to be learning about these tissues in this class. We're going to be learning about epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues, if I can spell it. Epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissues, and nerve tissues. These are the 4 major types of tissues in the body. It's okay if you don't know what these are. That's what we're going to be learning. But we're going to be learning what's an epithelial tissue, what's a connective tissue, what's a muscle tissue, and what's a nerve tissue. These tissues make up organs. Every organ is made up of 2 or more tissues. Every organ is made up of 2 or more tissues. Again, you'd say,
Is this in the lab manual?
yes, it is.
Do you have links on your website that cover this?
Yes, I do.
The way the guy sucks, like he must teach it like a school that doesn't.
Right, so here's the website, and here's the link where you can watch a video on CAT scan, a link to watch an MRI, a link to watch ultrasound and echocardiogram, and in terms of the different systems, here's a link as an introduction to the various body systems. And you can watch the video. So, for all these different topics, there's resources. All right. So Now, the tissues, the epithelial, the connective, the muscle tissue, the nerve tissues are in turn made up of tissue cells. Tissue cells. An adult human is made up of about 60 trillion cells. The study of cells is called cytology, coming from the Greek root cyto, meaning cell.
Yeah.
Cyto means cell. The study of cells is cytology. And if you've had college biology, you
I
learned
played my one game.
cytology. You learned about cells, but we're going to be covering it. It's,
That's my one and done.
it's, in
That's pretty good. That's a pretty
chapter 2
impressive
of the textbook.
good
It's,
game. Yeah.
Exercise 3, I think, in the lab manual. Now, one of the most amazing things that I could say about the human body, in fact, one of the most amazing things I could say about any living thing, is that all living things begin life as a single cell. It's hard to imagine. You started out one cell big.
All right, guys.
living things,
I'm out. I'm gonna go
a
code some
whale
games.
begins as one cell. A regular